have an amazing idea. Let's incentivize the behaviour change that we want to see. Besides thinking about human behaviour, what could possibly go wrong? I'm Karen.
I am Nuala, and we are the Safety Collaborators.
Our mission is to help people have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. This podcast was inspired by a LinkedIn post by a gentleman called Brad Green. He's a corporate HSC professional where he asked the question, have you ever tried to fix a problem only to make things worse? Nuala, over to you, because I know you've had a lot of fun with this one. So what is this one called?
It is called the Cobra effect. And I first learnt about the Cobra effect reading Brad's post, and it just gave such fabulous words and structure to describe how we end up with unintended consequences when we incentivize behaviours or changes that we want to see. And I think we've all had these experiences where we come up with that brilliant idea and then 6 months later go, oh my gosh, what has actually gone on here? So what is the Cobra effect? This occurs when incentives designed to solve a problem end up rewarding people for making it worse. And I think somebody else in the comments called it a disimprovement. So we've gone from wanting to make an improvement and we've ended up having a disimprovement. So where the story originates was actually in India, and it was during colonial times, and the British didn't want to have these pesky cobras around the areas where they were living. So
just to help people here for a second, a cobra is a snake, just in case somebody doesn't know.
Good point. Yes, talk about assumptions.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, very venomous, poisonous snake.
Yeah.
And what was happening was that there was a bounty given for dead cobras to be brought in Delhi. So you bring us your dead cobra, we pay you, we reduce the cobra population in residential areas. But what happened is that people went, this is an amazing way to make money. You know, we're a poorer country. So what we're going to do is we're going to breed cobras and then kill them to get the bounty. So all these cobra breeding farms erupted and ended up, great. Everyone got a lot of money. The cobra population didn't really decrease because we didn't have to worry about the ones in the wild. We were just breeding them, which was a whole lot easier. And not only that, it was like, well, we don't need to bother going hunting for them. We'll just breed them in our garden.
Yeah, exactly.
So while I was looking at this topic and doing a little bit of let's go research and Google, I came across a term on Wikipedia called perverse incentive. And I was like, oh my word, that, just makes so much sense, because when we don't stop to think about the unintended consequence of incentivizing what we want, it can end up having quite a perverse effect, as it did in India. So a perverse incentive is an incentive that has an unintended and undesirable result that is contrary to the intentions of its designers. And the Wikipedia definition goes on to describe that the Cobra effect is the most direct kind of perverse incentive, typically because the incentive unintentionally rewards people for making the issue worse. The term is used to illustrate how incorrect stimulation in economics and politics can cause unintended consequences.
Amazing. And I think we see this all over the place. Throughout history, we probably see it. We're not even conscious of how much this happens.
Absolutely. From grand scale to small kind of things, trying to incentivize your children to behave the way that they want. Trust me, they find ways to get around it.
Absolutely.
Where it looks like they're doing what you want, but actually they end up being rewarded for poor performance or doing the things that are wrong.
Now, I just had a little, sorry, I just thought about Shiloh. Shiloh is my cat. And so over the years, whenever I would go to the coffee station and in my kitchen to make myself a coffee or a tea, often she would sit quietly beside me and I might give her a little treat. Now, you only have to hear the kettle go on and she's meowing to get the treat. So the unintended consequence of giving her little treats at that time has now turned into an expectation, in fact, a little somewhat annoying. I'm wondering if that isn't a perverse incentive.
But it just shows, just how easily something that starts as a good idea can actually end up becoming a burden.
Yes,
or burdensome.
Indeed. Not suggesting Shiloh's a burden, but yes.
No, not at all. No. She
Very
just
cute.
does get quite loud when you don't give her what she wants.
But you have uncovered a few fairly crazy stories here about perverse incentives. So you want to share some more?
Definitely. And these also came up through the research. And one of them is in 2002, British officials in Afghanistan offered Afghan poppy farmers a $700 an acre in return for destroying poppy crops. Fabulous. Let's get rid of the problem. What it did was that it ignited a poppy growing frenzy amongst Afghan farmers who planted as many poppies as they could just so that they could destroy the fields and get a payout. So it was the Cash for Poppies program. And even worse than that is that some farmers were really above and beyond, and they went and actually harvested the sap that they wanted before destroying the plants. So they got paid for both.
I do actually remember this story, and I remember reading it or hearing about it. I was still living in Australia back then, only just, but it was a really big deal because obviously it went horribly wrong. You've got another one here, the 20th century paleontologist.
Good luck in pronouncing that name.
Koningswald.
Thank you.
Used to pay Javanese locals for each fragment of the hominin skull that they produced, so the human skulls that they produced. He later discovered that the people had been breaking up whole skulls into smaller pieces to maximise their payments.
Yeah, and completely undoing the history of what they were trying to find.
Absolutely. People will find a way,
I mean, one of the other ones that I thought was just, just so typical of human behaviour was in building the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s, sorry. So the US Congress was like, what we will do is we're going to pay you per mile of track that you lay. And there was a really inspired contractor who decided, I would like a little bit of extra cash for this job that I'm doing. And what he did is that he lengthened a section of the route, forming a big bow shape, completely unnecessarily, just so that he could add miles of track and get paid for it.
Well, where there's a will, there's a way.
There is. And sometimes we can look back and we can go, oh, well, that was quite entertaining, so this is about, people got a bit more money for what they did. But it didn't, did it hurt anybody? No. Did it hurt the budget? Yes. But then we come to incentives where actually it can end up hurting. So one of the other examples, which was quite devastating, is that fire departments were funded based on the number of calls that were made to reward the fire departments that had the most work. What this did is that it discouraged them from going and doing fire prevention activities in their communities, which led to an increase in actual fires. So it's not always about the money. What is the further unintended consequence that comes out? And in this instance is that actually safety was impacted, risk was increased, damage to property and environment was done. So it's not about going, well, yeah, there's some examples in history. It really is, how do we observe this in our working environments? And how do we go, what is it that we're about to do? And what could possibly go wrong?
I don't think that question gets asked enough. People just think, right, something's not working, or we need to increase the numbers on something, so let's just throw out an idea. I'm sure it's not just thrown out there. I do think that the intentions are probably very valid and mostly done with good intent to begin with. However, if we think about back in our working environment, we see it quite a lot, particularly in the industries we work in, where if you think of the safety statistics and some of the observations that are expected, the observation card, the LTI free days, rewards and bonuses for all sorts of things. And I remember This was some years ago in the heyday of behavioural-based safety, I guess, or where, the observation card was key to improving safety statistics. So this particular story, I wasn't involved on this project, but I certainly heard about it more than once. And I think it was over in Indonesia. So the intention, of course, is how do we increase, this is an ongoing concern for many organisations, how do we increase the number of observations that are made, or how do we incentivise people to do their daily observation card? Well, in this particular case, they decided to reward everyone for every card that was submitted. And the rewards were helping people to, it could be a cup, a plate, a sheet, a pillow. It was sort of household items.
Oh, wow.
So the intention was very, very good. It was twofold. It was like, okay, let's improve the obs cards and also help people to furnish their homes. And I think the effect was that they had thousands of cards, as you can imagine, which really, we're talking 3,000 cards a week type stuff.
Wow.
And they ended up, of course, in the bin, because nobody was going to read them. The quality was rubbish. But there were lots of homes out there that had lots of nice new items for their houses, furniture and kitchenware.
And even worse is that there may have been possibly a really good card in there.
They may have been. I'm sure they did look at them.
They just got lost in the process.
Possibly. So the other unintended consequence, of course, was the burden on the people that had to then look at these cards and do something with them. And of course, in the end, nobody's going to do that. They're just going to throw them away. You had a more recent one.
I did. It was around a client who already had quite a solid safety management system in place and, really good categories around observations and how they were put into the system. But on their clients, another vessel had an incident around drops. And because of this, they were like, okay, we're going to make everyone do 2 observation cards a day. So there must be 1 general observation and 1 observation just on drops, and design a whole new form, a whole new way of doing it, and a whole process around this. And the team that I was working with on board that particular vessel were like, whoa, hold the bus here. We already have drops as one of the categories within our observation process. There's weekly audits, there's monthly audits, there's a whole process that is very robust around managing this. And it was kind of like, it's just one thing, it's not that much of an extra burden. We'll just do it just to keep the client happy. And we ended up actually having quite a heated debate between the people on board and the people in town, to kind of go, hang on, guys, you're not understanding the burden this is going to place on the people in the workforce and where this could potentially end up. And after much debate and a review of the safety management system and evidence on just how robust the safety management system was to deal with it, it was nipped in the bud before it became a disimprovement to the system. Because what would have happened is that you would have had even less interaction, because it's hard enough, as you said earlier, to get people to do 1 good observation in a day. Now you're wanting them to duplicate the effort where they're already going, this is tough. Thanks for listening. We are all about helping you. So why not drop us a line at hello@safetycollaborations.com and see what we can do for you. Back to the conversation. We will share, I think, towards the end, some of the questions and the process to say, well, before we implement something, how do we make it better? How do we do that? And through all of this, as we were talking, I just suddenly thought it doesn't mean that we don't want to reward people for the right behaviours.
Absolutely not.
But it's about thinking how.
How and what type of reward.
Exactly.
If you take it out of here, you go into the financial sector or, any other industry. It's not just around this. It's projects. Okay, you'll get an incentive if you get it in a certain time frame. That just reminded me of the guy leading the Hoover Dam project. So back in the early days, right, so when the US government was building lots of these big infrastructure projects to create employment, etc., the person managing that, or the project manager for that, had an incentive to get it done quicker. And many, many people were put under pressure to get the job done because of the incentives he was going to get if it came in under budget and under time. So the unintended consequence back in those days was probably a higher death rate than there needed to be. Now, bearing in mind that HSE was very different back then. I think then it was a life for every $1 million or something like that that was acceptable.
Yeah, it was okay. That was acceptable.
That's
okay.
no longer the case. Well, not in most operations. So it depends where we incentivise and how we do it. You know, I can think of other things, you know, financial institutions where CEOs are incentivised for all sorts of. So what then becomes, I think you've actually written here somewhere, you know, what's being hidden, in fact? What do people stop letting us know? What do we no longer trust is going on?
And what do we no longer do? I mean, you know, that's in some ways is a big part of some of the infrastructure issues that we're dealing with in South Africa at the moment. Because there were really large incentives, and the more you had left over in your budget at the end of the year, the bigger bonuses you were given in certain of the government divisions, which meant what? We'll do less maintenance. Because then we're not spending as much, or we'll use inferior contractors because then we're not spending as much. And I mean, I've just actually correlated that while we're talking, has ended up with such massive unintended consequences that it's caused an entire country. I mean, we won't go into the bigger picture around everything else that's going on.
Not.
I mean, this is a tiny bit of that, but it has impacted because things are falling apart. Just on that, like on one of the projects that I was on recently, people were coming and going, other companies in this industry give us bonuses for LTI-free days. Why are we not getting bonuses here? Nuala, you need to speak to management and tell them that we should get bonuses for LTI-free days. And I said, absolutely not. I said, that is one of the things that I am so proud of that this organisation doesn't do. And they were like, what? But why? Why? So I said, right, let's share some stories and I learned an important lesson around how bonuses for LTI-free days have ended up hurting people in the industry. And a couple of their really experienced guys started sharing some intense stories where people were medevaced off in an immersion suit so that their broken arm would be kept in place and not be visible because we don't want to lose our bonuses, where people have nearly lost their lives because they've been quite severely injured, but, you know, they don't want to be the asshole who, you know, loses the bonus for the rest of the team. So just put me on light duty and I'll try and figure it out, you know, and then ended up being medevaced for internal bleeding. So where does it lead to that does have that horrible unintended consequence? Because I would rather not be the one who gets looked at funny every day because, oh, thanks, now we're not going to get that nice bonus before we go home. And it was quite surprising because when these stories started coming out, that conversation just was another one of those nipped in the bud because people were like, okay, that makes sense because we want people to speak up. We want to reward the behavior by improving the system, by having the things that are concerning brought to the fore, by building trust, by saying, you know what, we are proud of you for bringing up something that has stopped something or someone from being hurt or damaged. That's how we want to reward the behaviours we want to see and hopefully have the positive intended consequences that are improvements that are not unintended and disimprovements.
Another thought here is around rewarding people for poor performance. What do we actually mean by that?
It's when we put systems in place that, again, have the unintended consequence. So I learnt about this, and it was actually on an explosives factory. The rule was that before you went for your meal breaks or coffee breaks, you had to have a chemical shower to make sure that you were not then imbibing anything that may have erroneously made contact with your skin or what have you. But what happened is that the people who didn't follow the rule got all the nice food. They got the nice seats at lunch. They got the longer lunch break because they got to have conversations with their mates. And the people who followed the rules lost 15 minutes of their lunch break. They didn't get all the first row of food that comes out as the doors are opened. And they were being punished for following the rules. And those who were breaking the rules were being rewarded. And we do that in meetings. We had that conversation around how people view being on time, and some see it better as others. So we have a meeting, whether it is virtual or in person. And everyone arrives. Some people are, you know what, if you're 5 minutes They're 5 minutes before the meeting, you're late. So they are there 10 minutes before the scheduled time. They're ready to go. And in walks Bob, 5 minutes, 10 minutes after the meeting started, and everyone goes, "Oh, welcome, Bob. Now we can get started." Fabulous. Bob's had a little bit of dopamine rush because everybody's acknowledged that he's just arrived in the room, and everyone else is being punished because they've had to sit around and lose productive time of their day. So I often do that, right? The meeting starts at 9. Anybody who happens to walk in late, it's like, well, sorry, you've missed the introduction. You're going to have to catch up. And people very quickly start arriving on time.
But I think the unintended consequences of the first story, so the lunch thing, I'm sure that less and less people started doing the showering. So therefore, increasing the likelihood or the potential for
a long-term near miss.
Yeah, whatever the outcome of that would be. And in the case of meetings, and I mean, if it's, as you say, if that one person gets rewarded for being late by being acknowledged, the unintended consequence of that will be that everybody starts coming late. Or you get people who won't turn up at all, or they sit there and they're pissed off before they've even started the conversation.
3 of the things that Brad mentioned in his post was, around intention, action, and effect. And if we go back to the example that you gave around observation cards, the intention was we want an increase in observation cards. It's a good idea. We want to be able to improve safety. We want people to be speaking up. The action was an individual reward for every card submitted. Not good cards, not bad cards, didn't matter what card. You put in a card, you get a reward. And the effect was what you described of the thousands of cards going into the bin, but everybody's homes were furnished. So people were happy, but what it was about actually didn't take place,
I think there's something else there as well, in fact, because then how do you change something like that without the next unintended consequence?
Exactly.
Because all of a sudden you go, right, well, this is not working, we have to stop. There's going to be a whole array of unintended consequences. You're going to have unhappy people. 1 minute they were doing things, now they're not. And now you may get even less cards.
Exactly.
So it could actually really bite you on the tail, this one.
If we don't want to incentivize things that end up having in our world, like our safety world, where we end up having people hiding what's going on, denying what's going on, underreporting what's going on, covering up things, what should we be considering before we actually implement that new idea? Because, I know I've done it. I have a new idea and I just run with it because I'm so excited about my new idea. But I don't always stop and think and say, okay, well, let's have the discussion. Let's have the devil's advocate of getting different people's ideas, not just what could go right, but what could go wrong.
So what should we consider before implementing something new? Here's a few ideas and key points. Thinking about the 3 words, intention, action, effect, is sort of the overarching. So what is the purpose and intended outcome of the new initiative and incentive? And really think about that intended outcome. Is a new process system required, or would a short campaign to highlight the underlying concerns be sufficient?
And I think we often overlook that one. Because, we go, we have a problem, let's completely reinvent something new to fix the problem. Hold on, what do we already have that might just need to be tweaked? And that's something that you and I often go, when we go into a client, is it's not about reinventing the wheel.
Absolutely
You have good stuff. Sometimes it just needs to be reignited, simplified, or tweaked to meet the current concern or need.
Yeah, very true. So I think that comes into the next, how does it compare to your current systems and realities? Ask as many and I think this is always the piece that is absolutely missing. So many times the new idea incentive is created away from that front line where it actually needs to be implemented. So ask as many of the stakeholders as possible, how might this impact them? Ask the people that you're going to impact with this new idea. Ask them for their ideas, because they may have something you haven't even thought about, because they're looking at it through a different lens and a different view. To me, that's almost one of the most important ones in all of this. Ask as many of the people that are going to be affected by this change, how will it affect them and how it might impact them. So how could this incentive be taken advantage of. If you think of the original thought of the Cobra effect, it was taken advantage of. There was obviously a situation in the town or the city or whatever. There was lots of cobras around, which upset lots of colonials, understandably. Okay, so let's reward people for getting rid of them, which of course created that unintended consequence of cobra farms and lots of money being wasted in reality.
Yep.
So always think about how it can be taken advantage of and what are the potential unintended consequences. And remember, when thinking about human behaviour, always ask what could possibly go wrong and then ask what else. And keep asking that question until there is silence in the room for longer than 3.5 seconds. Yeah,
Exactly.
So, right? Just keep asking, and what else? Great, and what else? And keep that going. It's a really good tactic. Yeah.
And it is, especially because when we come up with good ideas, we don't want to crush our ideas. And it's not about crushing the idea. It's about making sure that when we implement this, we're going to achieve that purpose. We're going to achieve the why.
Yeah.
And that we're not going to rush into implementing this new incentive, which sounds amazing, and then in 6 months' time looking back and going, I've just become another example of the Cobra effect.
On that note, we'll wrap up with that line. Take the time to think before your great idea becomes another example of the Cobra effect. Before we leave this episode, we're actually going to, for the first time, actually do a little promotion. So on the 6th of July at 1300 or 1 p.m. British Standard Time, so based on London time, or for 2 p.m. in South African time, we're actually going to be running a free psychological safety masterclass for the members of the Africa Scotland Business Network, which is open to anybody. So if you want to come and listen to me have a chat to you about psychological safety, wherever you are on that journey, then come and join us on the 6th of July. There will be a link to the event in the show notes for this episode, and it's free to join, and you'll get to meet some other really cool people because the ASBN is full of great members. So thank you for joining us today. As always, lovely to have a conversation that matters.
Connect with us on our website where you'll find the show notes and links that we've mentioned for this episode. Leave us a message on the live chat bot. And follow us on LinkedIn if you don't already. It would be wonderful to connect. Karen Ovari or me, Nuala Gage. And if you enjoyed this, spread the word. Follow us and share it on your favourite podcast platform. Till next week, stay safe and stay well.